We knew it was going to be a busy morning for them. It was an even busier morning than we anticipated. We spoke with Silvio Napoli, the former head of Schindler Holding of elevator and moving walkway fame. He's going to take over as CEO. The person who's been filling that seat for over a year now on an interim basis, Marc Winterhoff, he will return to the role of COO. He took over, from the CEO who actually kind of took this company public. I think, Lucid, in addition to, you mentioned that the commitment as well from the Saudi Public Investment Fund and Uber. The other news here was as part of this capital raising, which they're doing some raising beyond just from the PIF and Uber, is releasing some preliminary earnings, which did not look great. So this is a company that has really been struggling to execute, make some really appealing and interesting electric vehicles, but has really struggled to make them in higher volumes and doing so in profitable or remotely profitable way. So, I think in short, Napoli has his work cut out for him.
I mean, is Lucid's goal to be a mass market EV company? From what I can find, it doesn't deliver a lot of cars. In 2024, for instance, it delivered more than 10,000 vehicles, but I mean, that's nothing compared to something like Tesla.
Yeah, it's a fraction. I do think it's been a case where the company has been sort of feeling around what exactly its play is. I think, for a time they were trying to go lower volume, higher prices and kind of casting themselves as a premium player. But later this year, they will start production of a mid-sized vehicle where they've flagged the rough pricing of that being around $50,000. So that would put them more, at least closer to the sort of mass market where you see, like a Model Y, you can get priced in that range. So, this is a company that has tried to compete with like the Mercedes and the Porsches of the world, found that really difficult, and they are doing a bit of pivoting. How much that has been a sort of like change in plan versus the plan all along is a little bit unclear, and is kind of dependent on who you ask. I think the CEO who was replaced about a year ago would have preferred they stayed premium, and I think they've changed tack a little bit under the new regime.
So right now, the Lucid's big thing, of course, is this partnership with Uber, and this was first announced in July, where Uber said it would buy at least 20,000 Lucid Gravity SUVs, that new vehicle you were talking about. Has this partnership with Uber amounted to anything just yet? I mean, is it getting its name out there?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see if that is able to get off the ground. They have a third party that's involved in that partnership, a company called Nuro that itself was working on delivery robots and has pivoted to getting into autonomous vehicles and trying to compete with the likes of Waymo. This is still very much in the sort of prototyping and testing phase, and we've not seen them actually launch vehicles. But I'm endlessly fascinated by just how much money Uber is throwing at trying to kind of have its own fleet of self-driving vehicles and have some competition for Waymo, even as it partners with Waymo. There's a lot of experimenting and playing around with business models in this space. And we are still so early for all the headlines we read about, new cities that Waymo is entering. They still have just a few thousand cars out on U.S. roads across the various cities where they have deployed. And so this is really, really early innings, even if people are increasingly having their first experiences with getting into a fully driverless car.
Craig, what's the latest with Tesla and its bringing on in a lower price model?
Yeah, there was an interesting report out of Reuters about maybe they're dipping their toe back into making a vehicle priced below the Model 3 and the Model Y. We saw Tesla China representatives deny that report. But what made that so fascinating is it's speaking of sort of changes in strategy by companies. I think Elon Musk has sort of minced no words about, in his words, it being stupid for Tesla to sort of bring cars to market that are lower price. Because in his mind, every day is going to be the day that Tesla sort of flips a switch and is able to render its cars capable of driving themselves. I think regulators are extremely skeptical of that, in part because those days keep coming and going without that capability really being ready to where people behind the wheel can actually tune out and not pay attention to the system that Tesla sells as full self-driving, which just has not lived up to the name yet.
Yeah, I mean, there's two components to that, right? The fact that a switch could be flipped on that and whether regulators would allow it. Technologically, whether we're there yet and whether the regulators have given that the okay. Do consumers want that?
And that's a great question too. I think some consumers absolutely, and you will see Tesla super fans, many of whom happen to be investors, sharing indications of progress where they are fond of taping their drives where things go well, and yet the questions that you sort of naturally raise are
Right.
How sort of choosy are they being about what clips they show and don't show. And you still continue to see incidents where Teslas that aren't being supervised are getting into really troubling crashes.